Authoritarians, they rely on fear and they create fear. You're probably getting an emotional reaction when you see authoritarians. And so you think it's everywhere, right? But it's really not, okay? Relational leaders are quieter. If it's fear-based accountability or if it's dominant leadership standard-based accountability, she's going to be fear-based. So relational leadership is the right thing to do. And it's honestly the way we're going to have to lead in the future. Again, as more mental health challenges come into the workplace, as more people face unprecedented challenges, as more people bring those challenges to work because there's no other place to put them, then you're going to need to be more relational. You're going to know how to navigate this. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Leading Below the Surface podcast. I'm LaTonya Wilkins, award-winning executive coach and author of Leading Below the Surface. Speaking of Leading Below the Surface, the second edition will be out later this month. So I'm recording this in September of 2025. So definitely pick up your second edition, which will be out later this month. And I'm so excited to get that to all of you. We're looking at September 24th, where you should be able to buy it at all major bookstores. I'll keep you updated on that. But really excited to get that book out. The first launch will be the hardcover. And then for the first time in history, we're actually doing a paperback. So if you're someone that likes paperbacks, we're going to have a paperback book for you this time. Today's episode, another solo episode. This is the third solo episode in a row. This was like kind of a below the surface series. We did episode on psychological safety. Go back and listen to that. That one was really highly listened to, very popular one. Go back to that one. And I talked about the misconceptions of psychological safety. It was inspired by an article by Amy Edmondson. And then I talked about the second one that just came out on the September 9th, 2025, was all about how leading below the surface can benefit your organization, to be precise, 10 ways. And this third one that I'm going to do is about the dominant leadership standard, why dominant standards are failing us. I'm really excited to talk about this today because this is something that's really been on my mind. It's probably been on a lot of our minds because it's something that's shifting in the world. But before we get to the topic, I also want to let all of you know that after today's episode, we'll go back to a guest format for a little bit, at least for the next couple episodes. And I have a very, very special episode on mental health I'm really excited to share with you, and how leaders can use therapy approaches at work, especially right now when the world is broken. And then I'm going to do a follow-up around dominant standards. And I'll be talking to an amazing coach. I'll share more about that later, but definitely follow. But we're going to be talking a lot about the standards that we're seeing. This coach, he's great. He's like in a lot of different organizations. He's got a very interesting approach to conscious leadership. And so we are going to be talking about what we're seeing. Like today, I'm going to talk about the dominant standard. I'm going to talk about what it is. I'll probably talk more about, I don't want to say the academic, but probably the academic side. And I'll give you some examples like I do with every episode. But then we're going to get into what we're actually seeing. So I'm really excited for that episode. So let's get started with episode 59. But before we get started, thank you everyone for all of the comments. Appreciate it. All the emails I get about the quality of the podcast. Please, if you like this episode, share it with others. It's funny because I just finished a class of Coaching Below the Surface, which was beautiful. That was the first cohort, so it was beautiful. More on that soon. And one of the things I learned in Coaching Below the Surface is how many people are looking for spaces like this, real spaces to connect, spaces to be below the surface with others. And so definitely understand that this is something, like if you pass this on to someone, they're probably going to love it, right? You're not bothering them. You're not being salesy. So yeah, pass it on. And if you are not following the podcast, please follow it. You could, Apple, Spotify are the main platforms, and then YouTube. Really trying to build up the YouTube. It hasn't been out there that long. So thank you to my OGs. For the other folks, yeah, go out there, watch it on YouTube, follow Change Coach's YouTube channel. Honestly, it's funny because I just started watching more podcasts on YouTube. I was like, at first I was like, I always just listen to them. Now I watch them instead of watching television or series. So, and it's worked out pretty well. So you might want to check it out if you haven't already. Most of our listeners are Apple. So if you are someone that's a YouTuber, YouTubers, definitely pass that on. All right. So let's talk about the dominant leadership standard. Actually, I did a podcast a while ago. I was a guest, the Owl podcast, and it was all about authoritarian leadership. So I'll leave a link to that in the show notes. That was a fun interview. And again, but that one was, again, more, I guess that was even more academic than this one. And it was a dialogue with two other people. So what am I going to talk about today? Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about the dominant leadership standard. I'll talk about different types of leadership, the authoritarian versus relational mainly, but I'm going to talk about some other forms of leadership that we have here at Change, that we talk about and focus on here at Change Coaches. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to start the first chapter here with the different types of leadership. Then I'm going to get into authoritarianism being on the rise. Then I'm going to get into dominant leadership standard, which I talk about in Leading Below the Surface, chapter 2. Very interesting chapter, probably one of my favorite chapters to write. Then we'll talk about the returns on investment on relational leadership. And then I'm going to give you some tips on how to stick to relational leadership when it seems like the world went authoritarian. And I want to reassure everyone the world is not going authoritarian. Authoritarians they rely on fear and they create fear. They thrive on fear. And so you're probably getting an emotional reaction when you see authoritarians. And so you think it's everywhere, right? But it's really not, okay? Relational leaders are quieter. It's like when you get on social media, it's like, I remember when I first started with the social network with the bird. This was a while ago. I'm not on there now, but that network, I remember seeing that there were many studies that talked about how negative news spreads 5 times as fast as positive news. So that's probably why you're seeing it. And plus, when you have an emotional reaction to something, especially something as profound as fear, you're gonna think it's everywhere, right? You're gonna get triggered and you're gonna think it's everywhere, and that it's taking up more of your world than it actually is. First, let's get into a few types of leadership that we talk about here at Change Coaches, that I talk about in Leading Below the Surface. So authoritarianism. Obviously, we're going to get into that. We'll get into transitional leadership, which I talk about in Leading Below the Surface, servant leadership, situational leadership, and coaching leadership. So with authoritarianism, many of you know what that is, but it's a leader that basically relies on obedience. And a lot of times we use that term in government, but it also happens with parenting, right? Authoritarian parents are going to make their kids obedient through fear. That's what authoritarianism is on a basic basis. And again, I'll put the podcast in the show notes where I talked about this a little bit more. Authoritarianism is going to be very transactional, right? Because they promise control, efficiency, bribes. There's a lot of bribing that goes on if it's in a government setting. But authoritarianism, and then relational it's human-centered leadership. One of the relational coaching ways, or one of the relational leadership categories is coaching leadership and creating a coaching culture, which I'm seeing a lot of orgs do now, especially those scaling back from DEI, official DEI. They're creating coaching cultures so people can connect better. And so coaching cultures are a form of relational leadership. This is something that we do, that we've been brought in to do, is help leaders be better coaches, which, again, as you know, if you read my book, that is a form, of DEI. And DEI is not, it's not a bigger umbrella. The bigger umbrella is culture. And all of these things contribute to culture, right? So coaching, again, I think any type of relational leadership is a form of DEI. And I don't even know why, again, I don't know why we put that in a separate category. Obviously, authoritarianism, again, we're seeing it on the rise. It's not everyone, but it might feel like everyone. I talk about this in Leading Below the Surface, but authoritarianism, it's meritocracy is part of that. Speed, decisiveness, optics, showing that you're strong. Masculinity is often a part of this. Regardless of gender identity, like toxic masculinity. The biggest problem with authoritarianism, and this is actually something I was talking to a leader about the other day, she had said her organization had kind of stumbled into a culture of fear. A culture of fear, you're probably unknowingly using some authoritarian principles in your leadership. The place I see that a lot is performance management. People get mad at me for saying, again, because performance management, when we talk about it, there's different types of accountability. There's supportive accountability, which Sylvia Molina talks about. I really like her work. And then there's dominant leadership standard type accountability. And the supportive accountability is actually the psychologically safe way to hold people accountable. And it's actually more sustainable. Because what happens is, like, let's talk about supportive accountability, what that looks like. So it's like, basically, let's say I need my chief of staff to come back to me with a sales plan and updates over the next few months. And let's say I have a sales goal for her of like 10%. I'm just making this up. Let's say that she gets into it and then the first month, she's nowhere close to that 10%. She's gotten 0. Well, if it's supportive accountability, she's going to come to me and say, okay, let's figure out another plan. I'm not getting any results, right? If it's fear-based accountability or if it's dominant leadership standard-based accountability, she's going to be fear-based. And I'm not going to know about it. So I'm going to lose innovation, right? Nobody wins in a culture of fear. Hey folks, I'm going to interrupt us, take a really quick break to tell you about 4 ways that we could support you individually or your organization this fall. First off, we could do coaching, whether it's one-on-one, short sprint, CEO coaching, or something for groups or teams. Speaking, you could book me for one of my impactful keynotes. I'm actually going to be releasing the 2nd edition of Leading Below the Surface, so check out my new keynotes. Workshops, you can choose from pre-built workshops, or we could do a custom workshop, and then facilitation and listening. We have listening labs, offsites, listening sessions, all of these things to help you build a roadmap to build trust. So if one of these feels right, let's talk. You could head over to changecoaches.io and reach out to info@changecoaches.io to get a conversation started. Nobody wins in a culture of fear, right? Because people are just trying to hold on to their jobs. So that's what that looks like. Versus relational and supportive accountability is a form of relational leadership. What that looks like is, again, my chief of staff coming back to me, telling me that they're not going to meet their goal. So relationally, what would happen is she would come to me and we'd have this conversation, and that would create a more creative environment, more alignment, more resilience, to the point where if this happened again, they would take care of it. And they would keep me informed, but take care of it. Don't you want that? Right? Like, why would you fear-based? You're basically micromanaging, and then you're not getting anything done. It's very rare that you get much out of fear-based leadership. It might appear that you do, but you're really not. Especially if you have a business or if you run an organization, needs innovation, if it needs collaboration, because that destroys psychological safety. So you're not going to be getting people speaking up. You're not going to be getting your new ideas. You're not going to be getting any of those things. So let's move to the dominant leadership standard. I talk about this in chapter 2 of Leading Below the Surface. I opened that chapter. For those of you that have read the book, you know that I opened the chapter up with a story. The story is I was hired to teach an undergraduate business class on leadership. And it was my first time. I was really excited about it. And I went into the local leadership library, and they had no books they had no leadership books highlighted for women, people of color. I think the only one was like Brene Brown. And a lot of her stuff, I'm not going to say it's not leadership, but it's like all of the traditional leadership books, like types of leadership, like with leadership in the title, were written by men and older men and white men. I'm not saying these books aren't good or decent. I've actually, a lot of those books were my inspiration for starting change coaches. But what I will say is in Leading Below the Surface, I write about knowledge, perspectives, and experiences and how we all have different KPEs. When I read these books, yeah, the theories were okay, but the perspective that they were writing for, when they give us examples, they were writing from very uniform KPEs. So I wasn't able to get like different perspectives, right? Like, yeah, you could do the research, like research is research, right? But it's like in these books, what makes these books so good are the examples. And the examples that they chose were examples that I was like, wow, that's something that I would never, that's wouldn't work for me. So yeah, so the dominant leadership standard, again, I want to tie that back to authoritarianism is a type of a dominant leadership standard where we're looking at things like perfectionism, being rigid, hierarchies, meritocracies, which are false. And I have a whole chapter about performance systems and Leading Below the Surface. So let's talk about relational leadership. And again, I'll put the podcast in the show notes. So if you want to hear more about authoritarian leadership, relational leadership, it's funny because I saw a lot of this between 2020 and 2023. Some people thought Change Coaches was a DEI firm, and we weren't. We're a leadership firm. And we're specifically a relational leadership firm, right? And so we saw a lot of relational leadership engagements, right? Series for leaders. Below Surface Leadership is relational leadership. And relational leadership, so usually people will come to us, and no one ever came to us for traditional DEI work. It was more leadership development. Like we have a workshop that's shifting to senior leader. We have workshops about everyday actions to build a better culture. These things, again, were very relational, but I think they had a DEI budget and they put it into that. And so we also saw a lot of coaching workshops, how to be a coach, how to be a leadership coach, day-to-day coaching for leaders. The reason why people focused on that is because they wanted people strategies and relational strategies that straddle DEI, collaboration, and also productivity. So a lot of those, again, we also talked a lot about psychological safety, how to make decisions inclusively. And they really loved these workshops because not only did they fit into like their leadership development blueprint, but leaders love these because they could use these tips right away. Like these were things, this is what their challenges actually were, whether it was global, working with global teams, whether it was across generations. All of these things were very helpful for them. So I started with dominant leadership standards. I talked about authoritarian leadership. Now in the final couple chapters, so I'm going to obviously wrap up. But before we wrap up, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to stick with relational leadership when it seems like it's out of style. We could talk a little bit about that. And then I'm going to talk about just some tactics that you can use for relational leadership. So how do we stick with relational leadership? People talk about making a business case for DI. Why is it easier? Well, because relational leadership, number one, you can create a shared language very easily. Like you can call something psychological safety. You can call, like one of the things that we do is we do a workshop that includes situational leadership. So you can talk about the type of leadership that you are going to be using for certain problems. You can easily show that, again, you're going to avoid a culture of fear if you are relational. Also, and I'm just going to say this because, I do think sometimes I get real focused on ROI because my clients do, but it's the right thing to do right now, right? It's just the right thing to do. A lot of people are struggling. And so relational leadership is the right thing to do. And it's honestly the way we're going to have to lead in the future. Again, as more mental health challenges come into the workplace, as more people face unprecedented challenges, as more people bring those challenges to work because there's no other place to put them, then you're going to need to be more relational. You're going to know how to navigate this. And that's why the next episode is all about therapy approaches at work. I think the second thing I'll say before I wrap is that, folks, authoritarianism is not taking over, right? Again, in government, we're seeing it. We're seeing a rise, but it doesn't mean that it's taking over. It doesn't mean it's the only way. What you're also seeing is when you see authoritarian leaders rise in governments, the people pull them down. Like they rarely it lasts forever. Like very few exceptions. There are some countries where we have seen it last for longer than others, but it rarely lasts forever, especially in countries that are democratic, right? And so I think staying with what you were doing before, like, were you authoritarian before? What did that look like? There are some cases when authoritarianism can work, and that's when you're maybe going through a big change, but it's always temporary. But again, I would even argue that instead of doing authoritarianism, you do something like a situational leadership piece, which is be more directive instead of, coaching oriented, instead of authoritarianism. You could be directive, but still be relational. And so, yeah, it's several of these things that we can balance. And I know some of this stuff might be hard for you to connect with. So again, what I'll do is I'll leave the podcast in the comments. The one I did, it's a longer one on authoritarian leadership. And if you want to chat about this more, I'm happy to do so. Just email me at info@changecoaches.io. There's just so many places I can go with this. And I also think that for those of you who are struggling, who are seeing things stalled, I think a way to move things forward in your organization, especially when it comes to leadership development, is focusing on relational leadership. And when you're focusing on that, you're going to start getting, effects similar to what you would see for traditional people strategies, right? Or traditional DEI strategies or traditional, coaching strategies, right? You're going to see, again, that connectedness. You're going to see that increase of innovation. You're going to see that increase of psychological safety, which is, again, going to make your business better, especially as things continue to change. All right, folks. So that's all I have for today. We will see you next time. Again, we will be talking about therapy approaches that leaders can use at work. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to the Leading Below the Surface podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to share it with someone who needs to hear it. And I'd love to connect with you. So follow me on LinkedIn at LaTonya Wilkins. And if something resonated, send me a note at info@changecoaches.io. I read these messages regularly. Thank you and see you next time.